Scott, we got a 12-team Superflex PPR 1.75 tight end premium start 10, and it's a 6 point per passing touchdown. Kyler Murray and a 2024 first projected mid-late, or Anthony Richardson. Go ahead, man.
Well, with what you have on the screen, this is definitely Kyler Murray in the 24 first, only because the 24 first is liquid. Now, I'll caveat this by saying, A, this deal never happens in real life. I've had a couple Anthony Richardson discussions with shares that I have that are now on injured reserve. Nobody values Anthony Richardson like this. Now, that's neither here nor there, but I do think there is significant bias on a guy like Richardson. Not only was he polarizing when he came into the league, he didn't play a lot, then he got injured, and he's no longer available for the rest of the year. So for sure, his value is going to be higher in 4 months than it is right now. But you go try to move him, nobody's – honestly, Clay, I haven't
seen him moved.
There's not people giving you Kyler Murray for him straight up.
Right.
Just because they're saying, I can use Kyler Murray now. We can talk a little more about Kyler. I do think – I'll just say this about Kyler. Shane's not here to defend his position. Shane has been very adamant that he's buying Kyler, excited for Kyler to get
top
back.
8 quarterback, right?
Yes. Here's the thing. If you listen to NFL people talk about what Arizona is going to do, you would agree they have top 3 odds to get the 101, right?
Right.
If not the 102. If you add the 101 or the 102, they're probably over 50%.
Sure.
Now, here's where it gets interesting. Kyler's coming back to play. I think for Arizona and for him, he needs to play to show he's recovered, to show he can still move, to show he still has it, whatever you think that looks like. 1 game, 2 games, 4 games. However, if you look at his contract, and I've heard numerous NFL people say this, if he gets injured again, and by March 8th of next year, he's not fully healthy, Arizona is on the hook for the rest of the contract. They can't trade him. The injury guarantees kick in, and basically they eat a whole nother year, and it's going to make it harder to trade him. So in that case, if Arizona is 1-12, Clay, are they really putting him back out there, risking some injury that could kick him out for 3 months? It doesn't even have to be another ACL. It can be a shoulder injury, anything where he cannot pass a physical on the new league year where he's injured. It changes the structure of the contract. So I think he needs,
man? What's your play?
Well, what I'm saying here is everybody that is excited for Kyler, you can be excited for the next couple months or the next couple weeks. I am not 100% confident that come week 15, he's out there. I can see them playing him for 4 games, and then they say, hey, he's a little banged up and he's just not fully ready to go for the rest of the year. And I'm just hypothesizing here that they find a creative way for him to sit out the rest of the season. And he wants to do it too, right? He doesn't want to get hurt. Knowing Arizona is going to try to trade him, he probably wants as many suitors that want to trade for him as possible, right? He doesn't want to be injured and people questioning whether he can be the guy in another city. If they've said, hey, we're going to try to trade you because we're going to go in a different direction, he wants them to be able to trade him to as many possible opportunities as there is. So I think there's risk with Kyler that I don't think he's a league winner. I think he's a quarterback that can help you. But in this case, I don't think you're even getting that for Richardson. So back to the original point. No, I would take Richardson if it's straight up, but Kyler in the first, give me that side. Easy.
Same format, 12-team Superflex PPR, start 10. Sam Howell and a 2024 first projected later, Kyler Murray.
This is closer. I would lean Kyler, but you know what? There's some leagues we're in where those firsts hold a lot of weight. If it's one of those, I think you do have to do an assessment on this and say, what can I do with the first that I get? Because you even said it last night on our AMA. Anybody that's not in the Discord didn't hear it, but Clay even said he's fine riding out Sam Howell the rest of the year and potentially next year for the points. So if it's a league where I can turn around and move that first with something else and get another legitimate, top 50 asset or better, I might lean that side. I'm okay moving especially if Kyler, I've been waiting for him all year. If he's my QB2 or QB3, I think I might be fine taking that value.
Yeah, honestly, with Sam Howell right now, I'm buying him, or in my head, in the back of my head, selling him as if he may not play next year. So I'm happily buying his production for this year, obviously, provided it's at a good cost. So that's kind of where I'm at on Sam Howell. Hashtag Commanders fan as well. Look at our sick background, huh? Shout out to Graphic 13, man. Very sick. So let's go back to school, man. So anybody who follows our stuff, they hear our start 9, 1.75 tight end premium. Let's help our subscribers out by engaging with them in the crowd if they have any good questions. But let's go through and just talk about the bones of our trades and what we mean by everything. So 12 team versus 10 team. Go ahead.
Well, we use this, I mean, to just kind of address the very, very start of everything. We use this. I think 12 team is the most common super flex. We've talked about 12 team versus 10 team. 10 team just kind of, it's like dipping your feet into the water, but it's not all the way going in super flex. You might as well go all the way in. So 12 team creates a little scarcity at the position. So that's why we use 12 team. 1.75, I think we're trying to hit that range where the league probably values tight ends a little more than normal. So we give it some legitimacy in terms of the discussion. And then start 10. I mean, I prefer start 11. I prefer start 12, but I think start 10 makes you really have to, at least for me, when you ask us start 10 questions, I really do have to do the math in my head. Like, is this worth the leverage or is this worth the tier up? Start 11, start 12, start 13. I think both of us are always leaning towards give me the extra pieces, just I can do more with them in leagues like that. So I think those are the most challenging. That's why we use it as our stock format.
Yeah, and we used to use 1.5 tight end premium as our stock format, but I've been just using 1.75 moving forward because, yeah, like you said, the league probably values tight ends when they see 1.75. That's another thing to consider because when you look at Sleeper, it's a 0.75 is what it would show as that, but we call it 1.75. So basically, in 1.5, the difference between tight ends and wide receivers is negligible in tons of cases. So let's go to this, man. When we say start 10, does that include kicker and defense? This is probably our all-time most popular question, Scott. 30 seconds, go.
It doesn't, and I know that it doesn't because we've had many people mention, hey, it's a start 10, but it's kicker defense, and then they'll put like, parentheses, woof or something like that in there. Like, I think most of our subscribers know. So anybody new that's tuning in or watching this video, kickers and defenses, they exist. But for purposes of this, if you're asking a question, you remove those two from your analysis, and that's the number of starters. So if you have a kicker and a defense and it's start 10, you really should be saying start 8 if you ask a question.
Exactly. So the main thing too, like Scott was saying, I like to picture it as kind of like a meter. Okay, so on the left side of the meter, let's say you have start 8. Right up at the top is start 10, and then you have start 12 over on the right, and you've got green over on the left-hand side for start 8, and then red over at start 12. And think of a player in terms of what their value is in a start 8 versus a start 12. So if you take, let's say, T. Higgins, for example, let's go a little bit. Let's go Garrett Wilson. Okay. He is, I'm going to switch it up again, man. Let's go Tyreek Hill. He is green big time in all formats, right? But if you look at Brandon Ayuk, he is not as valuable in a start 8, whereas he's valuable from 10 on. So you kind of think of it as a heat meter in terms of if they're relevant in any given starter amount. That was probably the clunkiest I've ever talked, Scott, but does that make sense? Basically, the more fringe player they are. So Jacoby Myers is a stud in a start 11. He used to only be relevant in a start 11. He can be playing in a start 10, but there's a lot of times that our listeners play in shallow formats and there's a totally irrelevant player that they list on their roster or that they're trying to get in a trade. So go ahead, man.
Well, just two examples that I think people can visualize in their head. So if you're talking about a start 8, it does two things. One, anybody that is a clear difference maker at the top is going to be far greater than the players that are even a tier or 2 below. That's the first thing. And that seems obvious to everybody. We're always talking about hammers, tier up. What it also does is it makes each position or each spot, because you only have 8 of them, harder to make up the gaps when you do not have that. So if you think about in a start 8 Superflex, each team is going to be starting 2 quarterbacks. So if you have the advantage at 2 of those quarterback spots against everybody else, they don't have as many random variance players that they can throw in and make
Right.
up that gap. If I have 2 QBs that are scoring 5 or more points above everybody else's 2 QBs, they only have 6 other spots to gain 10 points. And if you really think about how hard it is to say, Clay, I have a running back that is outscoring yours by 10 points per game, that's really hard to find. Like, that's not something you just say is easy to go and get. Start 12, you're looking at it the opposite. You can actually say, I can take more risk and embrace more variance because the threshold of who everybody in the league is starting is so much higher. That's where you start saying, okay, I kind of like a Gabe Davis type, a Tank Dell type in a start 12, because you know what? When they hit, they're still your 12th player. But then they score 26 points and you go, damn, I just got 26 points from my 12th player. Clay's starting Chuba Hubbard. He's never scoring 26 points in a game.
Yeah.
He's as equally as good of a starter in a start 12, but you can see where you can kind of embrace the fact that you're going to have more variance, especially at wide receiver, and you can just throw him in a deeper league, which is why we value a guy like Jacoby Myers, because he's always going to be within that start 12 threshold. So you just say, if I can get him, I'll just start him. And as long as he's in my lineup, I'm going to accumulate his points.
For sure. So here's another question. I play in a single QB league. So we call it one QB league. What's the easiest way to convert Superflex trade values to one QB?
I think it's very similar to the example I just gave. I actually don't think the values right now with where we stand in Dynasty are that different, because people value the above replacement QBs. If you're in a 1 QB league, even if it's a start 10, if I told you can get Jalen Hurts or Josh Allen in a start 10, 1 QB, you're probably willing to pay a decent amount, right? Maybe not a super flex price, but close to it. Like, you would give up, you understand the math of, if you can get Josh Allen instead of streaming Jared Goff, you would give up a Zay Flowers. You would give up a Zay Flowers and even maybe a late first. You know what I mean? Like that.
And oftentimes they're shallow. Single QB leagues, the questions we get, it's a 1 QB, it's a 10-team start 9. Correct. Or a 12-team start 8. So they tend to be shallow too. Direct correlation there. Go ahead.
Well, it is, because not only is it 1 QB, but it is shallow. So the advantage in the 1 QB is magnified. Massive. So before 4 or 5 years ago, back when I actually played more 1 QB, I would always be the one that goes, I don't need to value QB because of a scarcity thing. But now you start to look at the QB distribution and you're like, especially as the league gets shallower, like you said, why am I overvaluing Jackson Smith and Jigba? Unless he hits a really high threshold, really I should be using his supposed value to go and get a hammer at QB. Now, I think it's interesting. Right. We don't get a lot of 1 QB start 13 questions.
Nope.
And in that, I think you can probably play it a little more like, I don't care about quarterback, because you can still throw in 12 receivers or 12 running backs, receivers, and tight ends and say, well, I can embrace the variance. But I think you're right. It goes hand in hand. 1 QB shallow leagues, I think most people actually undervalue the quarterbacks.
So where's the line in 1 QB leagues in terms of, okay, I want these guys and then I don't care past this point, because it's less guys in a 1 QB, right?
I think it depends on your league. I mean, the easiest way to do it is run the WAR in a 1 QB league. Literally look at the 3-year average of WAR and just see what the distribution looks like. That curve will tell you like kind of where the avoid range is. You'll see it dip down and you'll go, do I really, like, I'll give you the perfect example. Do you really want Trevor Lawrence at his perceived name value versus Derek Carr? You know, like that's where you make a mistake. And basically what you're paying for there is security, kind of. But ultimately, do you care about security at all in a 1 QB, Clay? Are you ever going to be without a quarterback? Probably not. So if they're not producing above replacement significantly, that's probably the dead zone. That's the range where, man, I don't want the QB 7 in 1 QB, because I either want the QB 2 or I'll stream the QB 15. And I'm going to get the best of both worlds, depending on the price I pay.
Yeah, Shane always mentions the words crooked stats, crooked numbers. You want quarterbacks who could do that. Like last year, Justin Fields, for those few games, I mean, just put up the most ridiculous numbers. So Hertz is obviously someone you want in all formats. Allen, but yeah, it seems like the line is very tight in one QB, and if you don't have them, may just punt.
Well, and one more point about that is actually in one QB, you can take a lot more risk too. Like that would be the league where I'd go, okay, nobody wants Justin Fields, so I'll take him. If he fails, goes to 0, and is out of the league, it doesn't sting as much as where if you bought him in a super flex, he probably occupied a spot that's harder to replace. So one QB as a guy like Fields starts to fall, if you can send your, Jared Goff for him in a league where the person that has Fields doesn't have somebody to play, or they're trying to stream, Baker Mayfield or something, like that's the league where I go, I don't care if I have QB 10, I'll take Fields. And if he fails, he fails. But the games he plays, I think I probably have a better shot at having higher upside.
So when we were doing mocks or whatever back before the draft, we were recommending or even mocking taking Anthony Richardson and one QBs around, there was an argument depending on roster construction as early as 105, but we were saying the 107 to 112 range is worth a look because he's the type of QB. So let's talk, Scott, about picks in a super flex versus a one QB. Now, what's the easiest way to do the equation? Any quarterbacks obviously aren't relevant in a one QB unless you have an Anthony Richardson. We'll see if Caleb Williams ends up being in that conversation, but talk about the value of picks in a one QB. And again, how the one QBs tend to be on the shallower side.
Yeah. So the easiest visual is, because I've done this exercise in Superflex before. If you just take a standard stock 12 team start 10 Superflex, the picks really start to fall into a flat range. So call it a pick dead zone right around the 106 in a typical draft. Like historically, that's where it starts to level off. And the war that you actually get from those picks starts to really level off from like the 106, 107 to the 204. Now, if you just assume basic math in Superflex, you remove, let's say, 2 quarterbacks from there, because there's going to be usually one in every class where you're like, I'm going to probably be willing to pick in that second tier, like So 106 in Superflex, you remove 3 QBs. That's usually like the top 3 or 4 picks in a 1 QB that matter. But let's say one of those is a Superflex, or one of those is a quarterback in the next tier. So like there's going to be one Anthony Richardson, one Trey Lance, one Justin Fields, where someone's going to go, hey, I got nothing else to pick here at the 111. I'll just take the QB. I still think you probably are looking at top 3 or 4 picks. And then all the other picks should really be treated very similarly. Like the variance of picking which players it's going to be outweighs my ability to pick those players when I'm on the clock. So we hear 10 teams start 10, 1 QB. I give up a mid to late first. When I hear that, I don't care if it's the 106 or the 110. Same thing. I'm willing to get rid of it because it's going to fall into the flat tier. Whereas in Superflex, you'd probably be going 106 is definitely different than 110. There's a chance it's in a higher tier. So you wouldn't want to just say those picks are the same. But 1 QB, it just levels off faster. It levels off sooner.
Yeah, I wanted to make sure we address that because yeah, again, going through that mock, once we got to like 104, 105, we were like, I don't know what to do. So in 1 QB, especially shallower ones, if you're contending, and you should only have, if you're rebuilding, it should be a very short rebuild in such a shallow format. But take my first. If you know you're going to be in the playoffs, you're strongly in the playoffs, package that first with any depth you have in that shallow league to try to get a hammer, as we always say. So on that note, Scott, when is process over players the wrong process? What formats? Because we value picks in our conversations. We play in a lot of start 11s. You play in a bunch of crazy leagues. But even in start 10, we like to get an extra piece, these tear down moves where we sell a player and get a lesser player, quote unquote, value on top. Go ahead. When is our process not a fit for a listener?
So I'll give 2 examples. We kind of already talked about the shallowness of leagues. There are certain leagues where some of the deals we take that are quote unquote like leverage or whatever, that they're just really not even worth exploring if they're below the threshold where it matters. Who cares if, 1 QB, I'm moving a guy for a third and another third. If I'm losing a spot start out of the guy I'm trading, I don't care about the extra third, So in those cases, it's not going to matter. I'll give 2 examples. So the first one is going to be in leagues that are super active, and you are going with a process move. So I'm trading away a running back for another running back and a third round pick. And I'm looking at that without knowing any context. I'm going to say, man, that's a good deal. The running backs are the same thing. However, if you have a roster construction or you're constructing in a way where that running back you're trading away is someone you could start even one time, essentially all you're doing is moving the start for an extra asset that you would later want to buy a start with.
Exactly.
So it's got to be at a spot where process, usually for me, process deals happen in places where I don't immediately need what I'm trading. So running backs, backup quarterbacks, extra receivers, if they're in spots where I go, hey, I can kind of hedge my bets and move this piece and slide something else equal into my lineup, that's okay where I'm doing a process deal. The second thing is process deals usually involve adding assets, leverage trades, right?
Yep.
It's got to be a league where that's actually going to help you in the future. Some people are like, my league's not active. We've gotten direct questions. Nobody values seconds or thirds in my league. Nobody will trade anything of value, even for a second. And I'm like, they won't give you a Deontay Foreman or a Josh Dobbs. No, they'll just bury those guys on their bench because they don't value the picks. In that case, you don't want to be the team that has every second and third when you can't buy points with it. So you got to kind of evaluate the league activity. If it's a low activity league and half the people are on another planet in terms of how they value things, that's probably not the league where I want to just go leverage trade, process trade, leverage trade, because then great, you're stuck with all these assets that nobody else values. And usually it's a catch-22. How did you get all those process trades? Because it's a bunch of people that don't value them.
Yeah, right. No,
it's like, Clay, how'd you get 8 seconds? No one values seconds. So then you're like, well, I'm going to try to buy stuff with those seconds. And they go, no, we don't want seconds. So then you're like, okay, now I'm stuck with them all.
It was very generous. So another question, 4 point versus 6 point pass TD. The difference in how much you care when you're making a trade, or you're like, hey, I need to try to tier up, get an elite QB. If it's a 4 point per passing touchdown, how laser focused are you in on, I mean, if they're even attainable, but Allen and Hurts, etc.?
I would say it matters less now than it did before. Like, let's face it, there's really not many running quarterbacks in the NFL anymore. There's Lamar, there's Hurts, there's Allen, there's maybe Richardson, but it isn't like we have an entire top 10 full of running quarterbacks. Like we've seen 2 years ago, we had 6 of the top 12 QBs were guys that had less than a 5% rushing rate in terms of their production of their points. So you had guys like Cousins, Tom Brady, Burrow, Herbert. Those guys don't run, and they're still finishing top 12. Now, where I think it matters is you're not going to probably see those guys be the QB1. Like the QB1 seasons are coming from, if you told me Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts, Lamar Jackson versus, and even Mahomes runs for like 500 yards a season too. It's not like he doesn't run, but let's not even count him. If you just gave me those three and the field for the next 5 years, I'd take those three to finish at the very top. But that doesn't mean a Burrow, a Herbert, a Lawrence, those guys can't finish QB3, QB4. Yeah. So unless you really are talking about the difference between like QB1, 2, 3 versus 4, 5, 6, I don't really care that much. 4 point per passing touchdowns, the only thing it really does. So, but my first point, it doesn't change the order of the QBs really that I value. I value Josh Allen as like QB1 in any format, 4 point, 6 point, because the rushing is going to help him versus the field. In 4 point passing touchdowns, the only difference is quarterbacks are not the dominant strategy. So if you're familiar with game theory, there's either a dominant strategy or a strategy that's not always the dominant strategy, but it still might be the best spot to go in or the best direction to go in. In a 6 point per passing touchdown, most of those, the quarterback is the dominant position on the war graph from beginning to end. You always want to have a quarterback at any spot. So you want QB 8 over wide receiver 8, QB 12 over wide receiver 12, etc., because of the scoring. Right. 4 points, that line intersects a lot sooner. You get to QB 7, 8, 9, and you're now going, man, I would rather have the elite weapons. I'd rather have A.J. Brown or C.D. Lamb over Trevor Lawrence, CJ Stroud.
So,
You know, it starts to go where you could trade them 1-for-1 and it wouldn't be that big of a loss.
and so at that point in that format, you would be more than happy to tear down further than what you would be in terms of your comfort level, right? Could you be more aggressive in terms, like, since it's so flat right there, tearing down from Dak to, instead of Dak to Purdy, trying to do that move, going from like Dak to, Taylor Heineke or something like that, if that makes sense.
So I'll give you an example in a league, and it didn't work out because of the player names I'm going to give you. But in a 4-point per passing touchdown league, I would trade Justin Herbert or Joe Burrow or CJ Stroud for
Lamar Jackson.
One of the for one of the top elite receivers straight up. But because of the market, you can probably also get a quarterback thrown in. So for example, I give up Justin Herbert. I got back Justin Jefferson, but I also got back a throw-in QB, like a Kirk Cousins or something like that. And you can do that because the market just goes, man, those QBs are so valuable. But the scoring says, really, Herbert and the elite receivers are the same thing in a 4-point per passing touchdown league. And I'm getting another QB that is, a Cousins, a Goff, someone like that. They're not that far off from that QB 8 or 7 where you think Herbert might end up finishing, and you kind of got him for free. 6-point per passing touchdown, a guy like Burrow or Herbert, I'm not trading him. I need Justin Jefferson and a first to even come to the table just because of the scoring. So that's the difference. It's just how you value the position players relative to the QBs changes.
Yeah, so we've been on here longer than we typically do, but everyone in the crowd, thank you for joining. 151 eyeballs in here. Hit that like if you'd be so kind. Easiest way to help out the channel. But use this as an opportunity, if you wouldn't mind, in the comments. Post a question if you have any about kind of our lingo. Dynasty Trades in 5 lingo, what we say. If you need any clarification on anything, use this as an opportunity. In the meantime, so cue those up. But in the meantime, I thought we'd use this as an example, and I don't want to pick on Alan Schmidt or whatever. And he may have actually included the format up above. But Scott, we get this a ton to where we get a trade question and we don't know the format. So let's do this. Let's look at this trade from a 10-team 1 QB start 9. What's the answer here? Waddle or Pittman and an early to mid 24 first. It is a 10-team 1 QB start 9, not including kicker and defense.
Yeah, so to our earlier discussion, in a 10-team start 9, 1 QB, you're probably looking at Waddle inside the startable threshold, Pittman probably slightly outside of it. And that's just being a little bit perceptive, but it's also taking into account how the market is going to value those two players. If you don't think Jalen Waddle fits in there, you could probably trade Jalen Waddle for Amon-Ra St. Brown. And you know what I mean? So the point is the asset you have is in the startable threshold in a shallow 1 QB. So really the assessment becomes, okay, I could start Michael Pittman, but I probably have one of the lower end starters across the entire league with Michael Pittman. So how good is the first? If you tell me early to mid is a big difference. If you're telling me
105, Scott, crystal ball, 105, okay. Pittman and the 105 or Waddle.
Well, I was thinking 103 or 106, but to your point, if it's 102, 103, I'm a little hesitant. If it's 105, 106, even 104, I'm okay taking the risk because you're probably looking at a flat range of players where picture what you're going to be on the clock next year at 106, Clay. Clay, you're going to draft the wide receiver 4 or the running back 2 or the tight end 2. And you're probably going, the only thing that matters here is I picked the right player. It's a player pick. There's no process in the trade. So sure, if Clay says I'm the best drafter ever, and I guarantee I can pick the wide receiver 4 between 4 players in that spot and I will hit, then take the package. But I think most of us would be like, hey, if I can just color up and avoid that decision, I'll do it and I'm getting value and I'm getting a starter here. So in that case, yeah, this is where you're going to lean the Waddle side.
And as always, context, league economy. There's another correlation, and I don't want to speak out of turn here, but I feel like in the comments I see it. There tends to be a direct correlation between 1 QB and newer dynasty players. Now, a lot of players are getting into Superflex, but they may just follow content that's 1 QB. So they tend to be newer dynasty players where picks tend to fly around more. Just know your league economy when we're talking about all these trades and everything for that matter. Scott, let's look at this from a 12-team Superflex PPR tight end premium start 10.
Yeah, so in a 12-team start 10, even though it's not start 11 or start 12, I would still just go, you know what, this is a trade where I'll just take the free first. I'm already planning on starting Jalen Waddle. I can get away, even in a start 10, with just starting Michael Pittman, whatever that slot is, my wide receiver 2, 3, first flex, second flex, I don't care. They're all the same. I'm probably going to say Michael Pittman is within the startable range in the 12-team start 10. So I'm looking at this as it's a 2-for-1, but it gives me the ability to essentially get probably 2 players within that range versus 1. And Waddle's good, but he's not a difference maker. So now if you change the name Waddle to A.J. Brown, then you're going, okay, I might be willing to take the upgrade. But here, the receivers are close enough. They're probably in the flat war range to where I think you'd agree. You'd roll on the mid first. And if it's an early
100%.
first, I'm sitting on, I might even, if it's even Malik Neighbors or whoever the wide receiver 2 is, I'm sitting on a receiver. I may even prefer to Waddle straight up. If it's a Marvin Harrison, you've already won the deal outright. So the gamble you want to take there, knowing how the picks are going to be valued, is easily the 2-for-1.
Yeah, and we won't go past there, but if we were just to be looking at if in the trade there were a player like, let's say, Tank Dell, or who's another player in that range, or Cortland Sutton. If there were a player like that involved in that trade, then we may have extended the conversation into start 11 and start 12. Because when it's a player like that, they're only relevant in the deeper formats. They should not be considered. And if your league rather values those players as worth something in a shallow start 8, start 9 format, package all of it up and get a hammer. So yeah, let's call it, man. This was good times. Hopefully this is valuable to the folks listening on replay. And thanks again to the 157 eyeballs in here right now. Smash that like. Let's say
good
bye
stuff,
to the crowd,
man.
Scott.
Yeah, appreciate everybody tuning in on a random afternoon. So thank you. We'll continue to do this.
Yes, sir. All right. Talk to you soon. Gonna end the